if it takes a person internally, a week to sort of figure out how to apply some convoluted definition to their work before they can even get started, you've sort of already lost the game in terms of making progress. The onus then is to start choosing this definition in such a way that it's operable, but also meaningful.
I'm thrilled today to have our guest, Alix Guerrier, on our podcast. Alix, thanks for joining us. Alix is CEO of DonorsChoose.
Jason, it is great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Fantastic. So, for our listeners who may have tuned into a previous episode with Abby Fuhrer, who runs marketing for DonorsChoose. DonorsChoose has been a long-time customer of Simon, and I've really gotten to know the business quite well over the last several years. And as folks who may have listened to the last episode, my wife was actually previously a teacher in a previous career. Many personal connections into the mission and into the challenges and the opportunities around improving the life of educators and of course children across the country.
Well, it's a great partnership, and as you know, I'll just say our team loves the product and sort of raves about you and your team as well.
Got it. Well, I mean, I really enjoy every interaction I've had with the team, and the problems are fascinating. The team is fantastic as well. So, getting into things, Alix and I were speaking the other day about the mission behind DonorsChoose, and today we have a very, very interesting topic that really starts with a bit of a business transformation and ends with how to think about top level goals and KPI settings, KPI setting for your organization and what that means across various sub-functions, certainly marketing included. One thing that DonorsChoose has really pushed on, and I'll let Alix take it in a few seconds, is rethinking what the top level goals of the business are. Of course, DonorsChoose is a nonprofit. The mission ultimately is in funding classrooms and classroom education, supplies, and beyond. And historically, a lot of the business goals have been around revenue. Until recently, where that's really changed materially. And Alix, before I steal your thunder, why don't you just let folks know the changes, where it came from, and how you think about it at a high level.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And if it's okay, I'll back up just a little bit to lay out the basics of our business model. We are a nonprofit, although we're on the more unique side in terms of our business model, in that we are self-sufficient. We raise money for teacher projects. We serve public schools across the country. We were founded way back in 2000. Our founder was a teacher in New York, really as one of the first, if not the first, crowdfunding platforms before that was really even a word. And he created a site to allow donors, first teachers, to list needs that they had for classroom materials, and then donors could choose the projects to fund. And we've grown from that point. We still do exactly that, although we've grown in terms of the donors that we serve, not just individual donors, but also corporate partners, and actually now some state government funders as well. And in terms of scale, as I mentioned, we serve public schools around the country. We just closed out our record year, raising $185 million for teacher projects around the country, which we're really proud of. And we are self-sufficient. We have a voluntary addition, a sort of tip that we call it. And so donors can, choose not to do it, but almost everybody chooses to add on an additional amount to fund our own operations. So in some ways, we are very much like a for-profit company, crowdfunding for-profit that you might see online. And we have been focused, over the entirety of almost the entirety of until recently of the organization's existence on just raising funds. Revenue is impact in classrooms. That's sort of the basic equation. And that has been the driving KPI for the first sort of 21 years of the organization's existence. And then a few years ago, and I'll give the board and the leadership team, by the way, I'm new on the team. So I'm the first non-founder CEO of DonorsChoose, having transitioned from our founder just a few months ago. We're recording this at the 1st of August, and we did this transition in April of this year. So I am a recent addition to the team, recent addition to DonorsChoose. And so here I'm giving credit to the leadership team before I came on, as well as the board. Starting back in 2019, they started a conversation about equity and how to be more explicit in our operating model about our ability to advance the cause of equity. I mean, it's sort of implicit in the idea of DonorsChoose, but they wanted to make it front and center. And I'm calling out that year 2019 because actually this conversation at DonorsChoose started even before 2000. That is to say, even before the nation and the world's attention was turned in a much greater way towards racial equity in particular. And they started that conversation and finally decided, and this is what you referred to, they decided to change the top level driving goal. And the board tasked the leadership team with coming up with a measure, a KPI, the top KPI, in fact, that would center on equity. And that was the change that the leadership team made.
Got it. Well, it's really a great story, and I'm sure every one of our listeners is very familiar with a lot of the renewed focus around equity that happened in 2020 and the summer after after the pandemic, and when I sort of reflect on the opportunities here, they're extremely exciting. And my sort of qualitative brain comes to the opportunities around promoting equity. At the same time, I think the question that's top of mind for me is how do you think about measuring this? I can tell you 10 out of 10 times how I can measure revenue. But measuring equity doesn't always seem that obvious. So maybe you can talk about how you think about this at DonorsChoose and maybe draw from some of your past experiences as well.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think, the question that you're raising here does connect to a broader question about the measurement of social impact more broadly. If we think of an equity goal as being, one dimension of social impact. And there's kind of this duality that I've experienced. So just a little bit about my career. Most of my career has been in education, although I've done a number of different things and sort of have worked on it from different perspectives, including having co-founded an education technology startup. I was a consultant, and also on the nonprofit, so on the for-profit side, and then also on the nonprofit side. Before coming to DonorsChoose, I was the CEO of another giving platform called Global Giving that supports charities around the world, with very much the same business model as we have here at DonorsChoose. And, my own experience, especially within education, but again, more broadly across the social sector, is that on the one hand, there has been a lot of excitement and energy and work about the idea of quantitatively and maybe rigorously measuring impact. There's a whole field of measurement, and evaluation in the social impact in the social sector. And this goes back, more than 20 years, but especially I would say over the last 25 years, a kind of MBA-ification almost of the social sector. Lots of MBAs, like myself, frankly, coming out and having this idea that, hey, can't we take the tools that are present in the for-profit side, that companies use, that maybe financial institutions use, and just bring that same level of rigor and analysis to make sure that we're acting optimally. It turns out to be really tough. I mean, your question speaks to this because exactly what you mean when you say that word equity immediately starts to open up into, a tangled maze that might take a long time to really decipher, and it means different things to different folks. And the data aren't always there. So before I talk about, or, I don't know if we want to talk a bit more about those challenges, what I'll say is that at DonorsChoose, we took a step towards trying to have a very simple solution to this. Simple, not in the sense of easy, but simple in the sense of more straightforward and maybe more likely to have success. And that was to take advantage of data that do exist about the schools in our country. Thanks to No Child Left Behind in particular, we actually have a fair amount of data about student population, about the income status and the socioeconomic status of families, and which schools have a high percentage of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's usually the metric. We also have a lot of racial and ethnic data about students in the schools, not on an individual level, but on an aggregate level. For the most part, we can know what the demographic makeup is of any given school in the country. And so we took advantage of those data, which again are available on every public school in the country. And we used it to create an initial designation. Internally, we call it equity focused schools. Actually, externally as well. You can search for this on our site if you're so interested as a donor. And we decided, since we're focused on both racial equity and socioeconomic equity, to create an initial target that's at the intersection of both of these topics. So we focused on schools that have a majority of students in a low socioeconomic status. That is, a majority, over 50% of the students qualify for free and reduced lunch, and over 50% of the students. So again, a majority of students are from underserved racial groups. So that is Black, Latino, Indigenous, Pacific Islander. And so if both of those conditions are true, then that counts as an equity-focused school. Now, incidentally, I'll just note that I'm a public school kid myself, from public schools K through 12 in New Haven, Connecticut. And actually, the schools that I graduated from would have been and are today equity-focused schools. And the schools that I taught in as a teacher are also equity-focused schools. So the fact of this focus had something to do with my excitement about joining the team here at DonorsChoose.
Got it. No, that's great. So the definition is incredibly clear. And I guess within that definition, there is, I guess, a revenue component in saying, hey, now let's make sure that the revenue is coming in, within this specific class of schools and populations.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. And so that was now sort of anointed as our driving goal. So we're still measuring dollars, but we're measuring dollars specifically to equity-focused schools. And then other measures, are still being tracked, certainly overall revenue, but also other sort of derivative measures, such as the percentage of dollars that are going to equity-focused schools, as well as other sorts of measures. We have voluntarily asked teachers to offer, if they wish, their racial identity. And we have a focus on making sure that, for example, Black teachers are funded at least proportionate rates to white teachers. So that's an example of additional sort of secondary metrics that we're also tracking here.
Got it. So maybe we can talk a bit about what this means for sort of various teams across the organization. Obviously for our customer base, for our listeners, today, many folks are in marketing organizations, and DonorsChoose is a very interesting model because it's a two-sided marketplace. Ultimately, if the projects aren't there to be funded on the sell side by the right teachers and meet the condition, then it doesn't matter how many donors there are to fund the projects. And similarly, if the donors aren't there and the projects are, then you'll have a similar challenge. So how do you think about growing the base and on one level, and then also just enabling and empowering the right teams to make it all happen?
Yeah. So I'll just preview and say this has been a good story so far, although it's certainly not without challenges including today, and uncertainty really going all the way back. So for some of our teams, this, despite sort of universal excitement about the equity focus, and I can report that the entire organization was behind this. It started really at the leadership and board level, but it cascaded through. So the team was excited, and yet there was something scary about changing this KPI, especially for a driven team like we have at DonorsChoose, and a bit of a worry about what it would mean for some of our stakeholder groups. I mean, the topic of racial equity is controversial. It can be controversial. And frankly, it's at this current moment, especially controversial in the education sector. And when you think about public schools and sort of, school boards, there are some increased sort of scrutiny and attention and controversy related to this topic. And so one big question was, will elevating this and elevating it so publicly be a detriment to our ability to form partnerships? Does it create risk maybe for some of our funders that they wouldn't want to engage or makes them hesitant. And so that was a big worry about, initially. Again, not one that stopped us, but to your question about, about enabling the team and sort of the change management around the goal, one of the things that we had to do, and here I credit again the leadership team, even before I came, was to equip teams with more knowledge, training, frankly, about these topics. Again, although it had been implicit in our model, it hadn't been really talked about, explicitly, certainly not with external audiences. And so that the ability to communicate with external audiences about racial equity sort of with confidence is not something that you can just make up. You've got to work on that, and you've got to work on not only the sort of talking points, but the internal knowledge. One part of that, just as an example, has been actually starting up a new team. We have a new team, Equity and Impact, led by an amazing leader internally, Steen Joy-Lyles. And one of her mandates, she does quite a bit, but one of her mandates is actually to be a hub for producing the sort of knowledge and being the knowledge base to serve teams internally around their questions, their sort of function-specific questions that relate to equity. So, the sort of short version is that you can't just do a big change like this, introduce a big change, and then just let folks do it. You've got to build in education, sometimes we call it the scaffolding. You've got to build in the internal supports and be quite deliberate about that, and make sure you're thinking about internal needs as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And obviously, with the business doing almost $200 million in funding per year, there's a lot of moving parts, including teachers who are depending to get funded, partners who are looking to continue to affect their mandates, whatever they might be, which are obviously independent of the focus of DonorsChoose. So that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Now, as it turns out, I mentioned that this was a happy story. As it turned out, actually, I think that our focus has actually been in sync with the increasing focus on equity of a lot of our partners. And so, again, credit to the leadership team for, in a way, being at least a sort of a year ahead of this and getting a little bit of a head start. We've been able to go to partners and find an audience that has actually been quite interested and engaged in what we have to offer as a platform to serve equity directly. So it's been something that has, in fact, it turns out, driven more funding. And we've seen our percentages go up to equity-focused schools in some significant ways. And so that's been, it's been great for the team. It's sort of, alleviated some of the initial concerns and been a big motivator for continued work here.
Great. So it seems like the changes were well received, but maybe if you can sort of now speak to some of the results, and have you been able, and has the business been able to actually increase equity, show progress, and what does that look like?
Yeah. And I'll also be frank about some of the challenges as well. So on the top line, it's been a really awesome year, and I just can't say enough about how proud and impressed I am of the team sort of throughout the company for taking this new mandate. And again, this is a high performing team, and it's been a high performing team that's really been laser focused on really one more straightforward measure, right? Just let's get the funding to get the teachers the resources that they need. That's sort of been it. And the team has done an amazing job over 20 years of really optimizing against that goal. And then we just closed out our fiscal year at the end of June, the first year where that really was complicated and, in that kind of complex way and changed. The results have been great. I mentioned that we had our record year. So we had a target for the amount of funding that we would raise for equity-focused schools, about 70 million, and we ended up raising over 80 million for that. On some of the other secondary metrics that I measured or that I mentioned, those were also really, I think it's fair to say, blown out of the water. The top line revenue, was at the highest level ever. And then also with respect to equity, So for example, among our corporate partners, it's interesting if we take this definition, of equity focused schools. Now, again, it was just created, but we can sort of cast it backwards to see what our percentages looked like in the past, even before it was created. And it's amazing how consistent the funding has been. It's been about 60% of our corporate, partner giving has gone to equity focused schools, which is a good percentage. And then it just ticked up like stepwise to 70% this year. Like, it was, we have a chart about this, 59, 61, 60, 59, over the last 5 or 6 years, and then a stepwise change up to 70%. And that's really attributable to brand new campaigns that we've been able to do that have excited our partners. Yeah. And so when we look at these measures, we are really excited about the progress we've made. Now, are there challenges? Yes. For example, here's one. And this, again, I think links to some broader challenges that you see across the social sector when it comes to rigorous measurement. There's a kind of arbitrariness about the definition. I mean, it is purposeful and it's the right place to start. But for example, there are poor students in schools where maybe 49% of the students are low income, or frankly, low income or minority students in, majority wealthy schools and majority white schools. And actually the need for that student doesn't turn out to be qualitatively less for that particular student than any other student, as well as, low income schools that are overwhelmingly low income in terms of family income, and also majority white, in lots of rural places in the country. And so there's a kind of arbitrariness that comes in, which I say not as a criticism, because you have to start in some place, but sort of as soon as you make progress, it starts to immediately demand looking at it and saying, okay, well, now how can we get to the next gap, and who else are we missing, and what's the next thing that we'll do? And that's sort of in the best case, I would say, when it comes to measuring social impact and using data to drive outcomes.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because when I think about, as a CEO of Simon Data, in my experience, running business and startups, establishing KPIs and setting a North Star and setting high level business metrics, simplicity has a lot of value.
Yeah.
It allows different functions and individuals to understand, what the number means. It allows better alignment. But with the simplicity, there are always edge cases,
yes.
Around, really looking at what we're actually trying to do relative to what the data, shows. And herein lies always a gap between, data, and intuition and understanding of the actual problem domain. And this is why, I think the human element of running businesses, isn't going away anytime soon. That plus many, many other reasons, obviously. But it's my general bias as an operator, that despite some of the corner cases and edge cases, which are big and they need to be considered, erring on the side of simplicity, at least initially, as you guys have taken, is really critical.
I agree 100%. When it comes to figuring out how you're going to set that compass for the North Star goal, if it takes a person internally, a week to sort of figure out how to apply some convoluted definition to their work before they can even get started, you've sort of already lost the game in terms of making progress. The onus then is to start not only with something simple, but something that and this is where the art that you're talking about comes in, sort of choosing this definition in such a way that it's operable, but also meaningful. And then you've got to make progress so that people don't lose confidence and can sort of, maintain their momentum around what is still a meaningful goal, and then get to the next place where, okay, maybe now we've sort of ironed this out. We're ready for the next order of sort of complexity, but still not too much, right?
Yeah. 100%. So Alix, before we wrap, question for you. If you, we just had this conversation, you and I, but if you could have this conversation with anyone else, any business leader or, CEO or leader more broadly, who would that be and why?
That is a great question, Jason. And immediately my mind turns to the world of financial data and fintech when I think about these sort of data-driven questions. I have always been fascinated with the company Fidelity, CEO Abby Johnson. Why is that? Well, because it's a huge company. It's privately held, unlike so many other, huge financial companies. So really under the control of a certain family. And they've been incredibly successful and actually pretty innovative, I think, in a lot of different ways. They also, are connected to one of the largest donor advised funds, right? Fidelity Charitable. And there's a ton of data, both on their normal business side as well as in their charitable side, that I think could really be used and leveraged to investigate questions of equity and access. And then I'll just sneak in one other one. It's still in the fintech side, but sort of a different look. Happens to be a friend of mine, Tayo Oviosu, who's the CEO of Paga, a payments company in Nigeria, but serving broader parts of the African continent as well, mobile payments. And first of all, they're doing incredibly well. But I think that he has access to a ton of really interesting data about a really dynamic population, in Nigeria and beyond. That's changing in so many ways. I'd love to talk to him about what insights he's driving towards.
Got it. Well, both of those are great examples, and and for anyone listening today, I actually did an interview last year with Fidelity's former CTO and current head of enterprise data, Mihir Shah. You can find that on our blog, and I've gotten to know the team quite well over the last several years. So very very data savvy organization. Really sort of second a lot of the things you said about that business. But Alex, sort of wrapping up here, really just first, thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your wisdom with us. When I reflect on the conversation, and really the mandate and the mission behind and this transformation behind DonorsChoose, ultimately it's about alignment between top-level KPIs and brand values. You have to ask the question: why did the corporate and partner sort of donation rates go up from 60 to 70%? The reason for this was because the entire organization was able to really align themselves around a very very tight and singular and well expressed mission in the market. And this resonated. Obviously this has implications around branding and positioning and marketing, but it needs to start at the top. A well defined set of metrics with a clear mission and vision are really what sort of start the snowball rolling down the hill, and it certainly seems like the snowball is moving at full speed. Really exciting times.
I completely agree. Yeah, and it's certainly our intention to keep that snowball running and growing. And let's talk again next year, and hopefully I'll have even more to say about our progress on these goals.
Great, Alex. And for anyone who wants to learn more about DonorsChoose, maybe you can tell folks to go to the website.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Come to DonorsChoose.org if you don't know us already. Start by finding a school or a teacher in your area, or maybe the school that you went to. You'll almost certainly find some interesting projects to fund, and every dollar that you give really leads to immediate impact in that classroom. So I invite everybody to come to DonorsChoose.org to check us out.
Great. And thanks for that Alex. And thank you for everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.com.